the Kushan and later Andhra periods around the 1st century CE. The regions of present-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and North India came under the control of the Kushans, originally a nomadic people forced out of northwest China by the Han. Exact dates are uncertain, but they ruled from the 1st to the 3rd century CE. The beginning of the long reign of their most illustrious king, Kanishka, is variously dated from 78 to 143 CE. Buddhism, during this period, underwent a profound evolution that resulted in the form known as Mahayana, or Great Vehicle. This vital new movement, which was to sweep most of northern India and eastern Asia, probably inspired the first depictions of the Buddha himself in art. Previously, as in the Great Stupa at Sanchi, the Buddha had been indicated solely by symbols. Distinctive styles arose in the Gandhara region in the northwest, present-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, and in the famous religious center of Mathura in central India. Both of these areas were ruled by the Kushans. About the same time, a third style evolved in southeast India under the Andhra dynasty, whose rule continued in this region through the 3rd century CE. While all three styles are quite distinct, they shared a basic visual language or iconography, in which the Buddha is readily recognized by certain characteristics. He wears a monk's robe, a long length of cloth draped over the left shoulder and around the body. The Buddha is said to have had 32 major distinguishing marks, called lakshanas, some of which are reflected in the iconography. These include a golden-colored body, long arms that reach to his knees, the impression of a wheel, chakra, on the palms of his hands and thesoles of his feet, and the urna, a tuft of white hair between his eyebrows. Because he had been a prince in his youth and had worn the customary heavy earrings, his earlobes are usually shown elongated. The top of his head is said to have had a protuberance called an ushnisha, which in images often resembles a bun or topknot and symbolizes his enlightenment. The Gandhara-style Gandhara art combines elements of Hellenistic, Persian, and Indian styles. A typical image from Gandhara portrays the Buddha as a superhuman figure, more powerful and heroic than an ordinary human. Although it is difficult to determine the dates of Gandhara images, this over-life-size Buddha may date to the fully developed stage of the Gandhara style, possibly around the 3rd century CE. It is carved from schist, a fine-grained dark stone. The Buddha's body, revealed through the folds of the garment, is broad and massive, with heavy shoulders and limbs and a well-defined torso. His left knee bends gently, suggesting a slightly relaxed posture. The treatment of the robe is especially characteristic of the Gandhara manner. Tight, rib-like folds alternate with delicate creases, setting up a clear rhythmic pattern of heavy and shallow lines. On the upper part of the figure, the folds break asymmetrically along the left arm. On the lower part, they drape in a symmetric U shape. The strong tension of the folds suggests life and power within the image. This complex fold pattern resembles the treatment of togasen certain Roman statues, and it exerted a strong influence on portrayals of the Buddha in Central and East Asia. The Gandhara region's relations with the Hellenistic world may have led to this strongly Western style in its art. Pockets of Hellenistic culture had thrived in neighboring Bactria, present-day northern, Afghanistan and southern Uzbekistan. Since the 4th century BCE, when the Greeks under Alexander the Great reached the borders of India. Also, Gandhara's position near the east-west trade routes appears to have stimulated contact with Roman culture in the Near East during the early centuries of the 1st millennium CE. The Mathura style, the second major style of Buddhist art in the Kushan period that found at Mathura, was not allied with the Hellenistic Roman tradition. Instead, the Mathura style evolved from representations of yakshas, the indigenous male nature deities. Images produced at Mathura during the early days of the Kushan period may be the first representations of the Buddha to appear in art. The Stele Inn is one of the finest of the early Mathura images. The sculptors worked in a distinctive red sandstone flecked with cream-colored spots, carved in high relief forms projecting strongly from the background. It depicts a seated Buddha with two attendants. The Buddha sits in a yogic posture pedestal supported by lions. His right hand is raised in a symbolic gesture, meaning have no fear. Images of the Buddha rely on a repertoire of such gestures called mudras to communicate certain ideas such as teaching, meditation, or the attaining of enlightenment, see mudras above. The Buddha's urna, hisushnisha, and the impressions of wheels on his palms and soles are all clearly visible in this figure. Behind his head is a large circular halo. The scallop points of its border represent radiating light. Behind the halo are branches of the pipal tree, the tree under which the Buddha was seated when he achieved enlightenment. Two celestial beings hover above. As in Gandhara sculptures, the Mathura work gives a powerful impression of the Buddha, yet this Buddha's riveting outward gaze and alert posture impart a more intense, concentrated energy. Therapy is pulled tightly over the body, allowing the fleshy form to be seen as almost nude. Where the pleats of the robe appear, such as over the left arm and fanning out between the legs, they are depicted abstractly through compact parallel formations of ridges with an incised line in the center of each ridge. This characteristic Mathura tendency to abstraction also appears in the face, whose features take on geometric shapes, as in the rounded forms of the widely opened eyes. Nevertheless, the torso with its subtle and soft modeling is strongly naturalistic. The Southeast Indian style events from the Buddha's life were popular subjects in the reliefs decorating stupas and Buddhist temples. One example from Nagarjunakonda depicts a scene when he was Prince Siddhartha, before his renunciation of his princely status and his subsequent quest for enlightenment. Carved in low relief, the panel reveals a scene of pleasure around a pool of water. Gathered around Siddhartha, the largest figure and the only male, are some of the palace women. One holds his foot, entreating him to come into the water. Another sits with legs drawn up on the nearby rock. Others lean over his shoulder or fix their hair. One comes into the scene with a box of jewels on her head. The panel is framed by decorated columns, crouching lions and amorous Mithuna couples. One of these couples is visible at the right of the illustration. The scene is skillfully orchestrated to revolve around the prince as the main focus of all eyes, typical of the Southeast Indian style. The figures are slighter than those of Gandhara and Mathura. They are sinuous and mobile, even while at rest. The rhythmic nuances of the limbs and varied postures not only create interest in the activity of each individual, but also engender a light and joyous effect. During the 1st to 3rd century CE, each of the three major styles of Buddhist art developed its own distinct idiom for expressing the complex imagery of Buddhism and depicting the image of the Buddha. The production of art in Gandhara and the region around Nagarjunakonda declined over the ensuing centuries. However, the artists of central India continued to work productively, and from them came the next major development in Indian Buddhist art. The 4th through 7th centuries, the Guptas, who founded a dynasty in the eastern region of central India known as Magadha, expanded their territories during the 4th century CE to form an empire that encompassed northern, and much of central India. Although Gupta power ended in 550, the influence of Gupta culture was felt long after that. The period of the Guptas and their contemporaries is renowned for the flourishing artistic and literary culture that brought forth some of India's most widely admired sculpture and painting. While Buddhism continued to be a major religion, the earliest surviving Hindu temples also date from this time. Buddhist sculpture. Two distinctive styles of Gupta. Buddhist sculpture prevailed during the 2nd and 3rd quarters of the 5th century and dominated in northern India. One was based at Mathura, the major center of North Indian sculpture during the Kushan period, and the other at Sarnath, whose style is reflected in Buddhist sculpture over much of northern India. The standing Buddha embodies the fully developed Sarnath Gupta style. Carved from fine-grained sandstone, the figure stands in a mildly relaxed pose, the body clearly visible through a clinging robe. This plain robe, portrayed with none of the creases and folds so prominent in the Kushan period images, is distinctive of the Sarnath style. Its effect is to concentrate attention on the form of the body, which emerges in high relief. The body is graceful and slight, with broad shoulders and a well-proportioned torso. Only a few lines of the garment at the neck, waist, and hems interrupt the purity of its subtly shaped surfaces. The face, smooth and ovoid, has the same refined elegance. The downcast eyes suggest otherworldly introspection, yet the gentle, open posture maintains a human link. Behind the head are the remains of a large circular halo. Carved in concentric circles of pearls and foliage, the ornate halo contrasted with the plain surfaces of the figure. Details also may have been indicated by paint. At the site of Bamiyan, about 155 miles northwest of Kabul, Afghanistan, were two enormous Buddhas carved from the rock of a cliff, one some 115 feet in height, the other about 165 feet. They were seen by a Chinese pilgrim who came to Bamiyan in the 5th century, so they clearly date before his visit. Probably to the early 5th century, pilgrims could walk within the cliff up a staircase on the right side of the smaller figure that ended at the Buddha's shoulder. There, they could look into the vault of the niche and see a painted image of the sun god, suggesting a metaphoric pilgrimage to the heavens. They then could circumambulate the figure at the level of the head and return to ground, level on a staircase on the figure's left side. These huge figures likely served as the model for those at rock cut sanctuaries in China, for example, at Yungang. Despite the historical and religious importance of these figures, and ignoring the pleas of world leaders, the Taliban demolished the Bamiyan Buddhas in 2001. Painting. The Gupta aesthetic also found expression in painting, though in a region of India just beyond the Gupta realm. Some of the finest surviving works are murals from the Buddhist rock-cut halls of Ajanta, in the western Deccan region of India. Under a ruling house known as the Vakataka dynasty, many caves were carved around 475 CE, including Cave Y, a large vihara hall with monks' chambers around the sides and a Buddha shrine chamber in the back. The walls of the central court were covered with murals painted in mineral pigments on a prepared plaster surface. Some of these paintings depict episodes from the Buddha's past lives. Flanking the entrance to the shrine chamber are two large bodhisattvas, one of which is seen in. Bodhisattvas are enlightened beings who postpone nirvana and Buddhahood to help others achieve enlightenment. They are distinguished from Buddhas in art by their princely garments. The bodhisattva here is lavishly adorned with delicate ornaments. He wears a bejeweled crown, large earrings, a pearl necklace, armbands, and bracelets. A striped cloth covers his lower body. The graceful bending posture and serene gaze impart a sympathetic attitude. His spiritual power is suggested by his large size in comparison to the surrounding figures, and his identity as the compassionate bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara is indicated by the lotus flower he holds in his right hand. The naturalistic style balances outline and softly graded color tones. Outline drawing, always a major ingredient of Indian painting, clearly defines shapes. Tonal gradations impart the illusion of three-dimensional form, with lighter tones used for protruding parts such as the nose, brows, shoulders, and chest muscles. Together with the details of the jewels, these highlighted areas resonate against the subdued tonality of the figure. Sophisticated, realistic detail is balanced by the languorous human form. In no other known examples of Indian painting do bodhisattvas appear so graciously divine yet so palpably human. This particular synthesis is evident also in the Sarnath statue, which shares much in common as well with the sculpture of Ajanta. Although Buddhism had flourished in India during the 5th century, some of the most important Buddhist monasteries, attracting pilgrims from as far away as China, prospered especially after the Gupta period. Hindu temples, generally small and relatively simple structures during the 5th century, subsequently became increasingly complex and elaborately adorned with sculptured images.